I raised 3 kids in this house. Today, strangers live there, and I have nothing. My name is Hannah. I'm a mother who did everything right for 15 years. I packed lunches, paid bills on time, and fixed what broke. The kitchen window looked out on my neighbor's garden. My son's drawings covered the fridge. Then my youngest got sick, and the bills started coming like an avalanche. 23,000. 47,000. Insurance covered 60%, which sounds good until you see the numbers. The loan officer had kind eyes and talked about leveraging equity like it was smart planning. I thought I was saving my child's life. I didn't know I was feeding my house to a machine that would never be full. The foreclosure notice came on a Tuesday. My daughter got her college letter the same day. 3 mortgages later, David was healthy, but we were ghosts in our own home. When you have to choose between your child's life and your family's shelter, what happens to the mother who makes that choice? My name is Hannah Thornton, and at 52, I thought I had figured out how to build a life that would last. For 15 years, I raised 3 kids in the same 2-bedroom house on Maple Street. The one with the crooked front steps I kept meaning to fix, and the kitchen window that looked out onto Mrs. Patterson's garden. Every morning, I'd stand at that window with my coffee, watching her tend to her roses while I planned my day around work schedules and school pickup times. The house wasn't much to look at from the outside. The paint was chipping around the doorframe, and the driveway had a crack that filled with ice every winter. But inside, it was ours. I'd bought the dining room table secondhand from a yard sale when Miguel was just 3 years old, then spent weekends stripping off the old varnish and staining it a warm cherry color. That table saw thousands of homework sessions, birthday cakes, and late-night conversations when one of the kids couldn't sleep. Miguel was my oldest at 18, all elbows and attitude, counting down the days until graduation. Sophia, my middle child, had just turned 17 and was already talking about community college, her acceptance letter pinned to the refrigerator next to David's latest art project. And David, my baby at 10, still believed I could fix anything that broke, from bicycle chains to hurt feelings that I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Days at the insurance office downtown, filing claims and answering phones. Evenings at the diner on Route 9, slinging coffee and pie to truckers and third-shift workers. It wasn't glamorous, but the paychecks covered our mortgage, kept the lights on, and put food on that refinished table. I was proud of never missing a house payment. Proud of the way I could stretch a grocery budget to feed 4 people. Proud of the small repairs I'd learned to handle myself, replacing faucets, patching drywall, unclogging drains. The kids had their routines. Miguel walked to school since he was old enough to drive, but couldn't afford insurance for a second car. Sophia caught the bus, usually running out the door with wet hair and a piece of toast clenched between her teeth. David rode his bike the 6 blocks to elementary school, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, and I'd watch from the window until he turned the corner. Evenings were our sacred time. Homework at the dining room table while I prepped dinner. Sophia helping David with his math while Miguel practiced guitar in his room, the sound drifting through the thin walls. After dinner, we'd pile onto the couch, the brown one I'd had since before Miguel was born, and watch whatever show David picked. Usually something with talking animals or superheroes that I tucked David into bed every night, reading him one chapter from whatever book we were working through. Harry Potter mostly. He loved the idea of magic, of wands that could fix problems with a simple wave. "Do you think Hogwarts is real, Mom?" He'd ask, and I'd smooth his hair back from his forehead. "I think there's magic everywhere if you know how to look for it." Our magic was simpler than Harry Potter's. It was the sound of the washing machine running on Sunday mornings, knowing we had clean clothes for the week ahead. It was the way Sophia would hum while she did dishes, the same song she'd been humming since she was David's age. It was Miguel surprising us with breakfast on my birthday, eggs burned around the edges but made with love. The house held all of it. Every laugh, every argument, every middle-of-the-night fever check. The walls knew our voices, our footsteps, our habits. I could walk through it in the dark without bumping into anything. I knew which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck when it rained, which radiator clanged when the heat kicked on. My ex-husband had been gone for 5 years by then, disappearing one Tuesday morning with nothing but a note about needing space to find himself. The divorce papers came in the mail 6 months later. I signed them at that dining room table, using the pen Sophia had given me for Mother's Day, the one with the little flower on top. The kids were at school. The house was quiet except for the tick of the kitchen clock and the sound of Mrs. Patterson's lawn mower next door. After he left, I had to take on that second job to cover the mortgage alone. Some nights I'd fall asleep at the table, bills spread out in front of me, calculator in my hand. But we made it work. We always made it work. Then David started getting tired all the time, and everything I thought I knew about security began to unravel. The doctor's office smelled like disinfectant and fear. David sat on the examination table, his legs dangling, kicking gently against the paper-covered cushion. He'd been complaining about being tired for weeks, falling asleep during his favorite TV shows, dragging himself to school like his backpack was filled with rocks instead of textbooks. "We need to run some tests," Dr. Martinez said, her voice careful and professional. She was young, maybe Sophia's age, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Blood work, to start with." I held David's hand while they drew 3 vials of blood from his thin arm. He was brave, braver than I was. I felt dizzy watching the dark red liquid fill the tubes. But David just asked the nurse if she'd ever met a vampire. The call came 2 days later while I was at work, filing insurance claims for other people's disasters. My supervisor let me take it in the break room, where the fluorescent light buzzed overhead and someone had left a half-eaten sandwich on the table. "The blood work shows some abnormalities," Dr. Martinez said. "We need to see David again. Today, if possible." I left work early, picked up David from school, and drove to the hospital in town. The pediatric oncology wing was painted in cheerful colors, yellow and blue and green, like they could disguise the gravity of the place with bright paint. Children's artwork covered the walls, handprint turkeys and crayon rainbows. But underneath it all was the antiseptic smell of serious illness. "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia," Dr. Martinez said after more tests. More waiting, more of David swinging his legs from examination tables. The words hung in the air like smoke. "It's treatable, very treatable in children, but it's going to require immediate and aggressive treatment." David looked at me with wide eyes. "Does that mean I'm really sick, Mom?" I managed to smile, managed to keep my voice steady. "It means we're going to fight this, baby. Together." The treatment plan was a roadmap through hell, disguised as medical terminology. Induction therapy, consolidation, maintenance. Words that meant months of chemotherapy, blood transfusions, hospital stays, and medications with names I couldn't pronounce. Dr. Martinez handed me a folder thick with information sheets and appointment schedules. "Your insurance should cover most of this," she said. "But you'll want to speak with our financial counselor about the details." The financial counselor was a middle-aged woman named Janet with a Texas accent and a desk covered in coffee rings. She walked me through the numbers with the patience of someone who delivered this kind of news every day. "Your insurance has an 80-20 plan," she explained, pulling out a calculator that looked older than Miguel. "They'll cover 80% of approved treatments. You're responsible for 20% plus deductibles, plus any treatments or medications that aren't fully covered." 20% sounded reasonable until she showed me the estimates. David's first month of treatment would cost around $60,000. My 20% would be $12,000. The deductible was another $5,000. Medications not fully covered by insurance could run another few thousand per month. That I stared at the numbers on her calculator display. I made $31,000 a year between both my jobs. Before taxes. "We can set up payment plans," Janet said kindly. "Most families need to spread these costs out over time." The first bill arrived 3 weeks later, while David was sleeping off his first round of chemotherapy on the couch, a plastic bucket beside him in case he got sick. $23,417 for one hospital stay. 4 or 5 days of 4 drips and monitoring and medications that made my baby too tired to lift his head. I opened the envelope, standing in my kitchen. The late afternoon sun slanting through the window where I used to watch Mrs. Patterson's garden. The number at the bottom of the bill was larger than my mortgage balance, larger than my car loan and credit card debt combined, larger than anything I'd ever owed in my life. I sat down at the dining room table and pulled out my calculator. My savings account had $4,000, money I'd been setting aside for Sophia's college, $1 here and there over the years. My checking account had $800 until next Friday's paycheck. I had 2 credit cards with a combined available credit of about $7,000. Even if I used everything, I'd still be short more than $10,000. And this was just the first bill. The billing department called 3 days later while I was at the diner, wiping down tables and refilling salt shakers. The manager let me take the call in the back office, between cases of ketchup and industrial-sized cans of green beans. "We understand this is a difficult time," the woman on the phone said. "We'd like to work with you on a payment arrangement." The arrangement would stretch longer than David's childhood. David's fever spiked on a Tuesday night in October. I found him burning up in his bed, his sheets soaked with sweat, mumbling about dragons and homework he'd forgotten to turn in. His temperature was 104.2 degrees. The emergency room was bright and cold and full of people who looked as scared as I felt. David was too weak to sit up in the wheelchair, so I carried him most of the way to the triage nurse, his body feeling fragile as bird bones in my arms. "When did the fever start?" the nurse asked, taking his temperature again while David's eyes rolled back in his head. "Maybe an hour ago. He was fine at dinner." They took him straight back, past the other families waiting in plastic chairs, past the television playing infomercials nobody was watching. I called Miguel from the hallway while a team of nurses hooked David up to monitors that beeped and flashed. "His counts are dangerously low," Dr. Martinez explained when she arrived 20 minutes later. "We need to admit him immediately. His immune system can't fight off even minor infections right now." That hospital stay lasted 12 days. 12 days of sleeping in a chair beside David's bed, 12 days of watching him get sicker before the antibiotics finally turned the tide. 12 days of nurses checking his vitals every 2 hours, of 4 bags dripping life back into his small body, of me Googling medical terms on my phone at 3 in the morning. The bill arrived 6 weeks later. $47,893. I sat in my car in the driveway, staring at the number. Mrs. Patterson was outside watering her roses. The same routine she'd had for as long as I'd lived here. The normalcy of it felt absurd. How could the world keep spinning when my son's life had cost us more money than I would make in 2 years? My credit cards were maxed out now. The payment plan with the hospital was eating up half my take-home pay. I'd already borrowed against my 401k, what little there was of it. Miguel had quietly dropped his plans for college and picked up extra shifts at the grocery store where he bagged groceries after school. Sophia was babysitting every weekend, turning over her earnings without me asking. The bank statement showed my mortgage payment bouncing for the first time in 15 years that I made an appointment with Janet, the financial counselor, and drove to the hospital through an early snowfall that made everything look clean and new. She greeted me with the same patient smile, the same coffee-stained desk, the same calculator that had delivered devastating news before. "I don't know what else to do," I told her. "I've used everything. Credit cards, savings, retirement. My mortgage payment bounced." She pulled out a fresh folder and a different set of forms. "Have you considered a second mortgage? You've been in your house for 15 years. You probably have significant equity built up." Equity. I'd heard the word before, but never thought about what it meant for my daily life. Apparently, it meant that the 15 years of mortgage payments I'd been so proud of had turned my house into something I could borrow against. "How does it work?" I asked. "You'd essentially be taking out a loan using your house as collateral. Based on what you've told me about your situation, you probably have enough equity to cover David's remaining treatment costs." She made it sound reasonable, responsible even, like I'd be smart to leverage what I'd already built instead of letting my son's medical bills destroy our credit. The loan officer at First National Bank had kind eyes and a warm handshake. His office was decorated with photos of his own children, a girl about Sophia's age, a boy younger than David. He listened to my story with the attention of someone who'd heard it before. "Medical debt is one of the leading causes of financial hardship for families," he said, pulling out papers that looked official and important. "You're not alone in this situation. The second mortgage would give me access to $42,000, enough to pay off David's current bills and cover the estimated costs of his remaining treatment. The monthly payment would be manageable," he assured me, "lower than what I was currently paying to the hospital. You're not taking on new debt," he explained as I signed page after page. "You're consolidating existing debt and using your home's equity to secure better terms." It sounded like financial wisdom instead of desperation dressed up in paperwork. David continued to improve. His blood count stabilized, his energy returned, and by Christmas he was asking when he could go back to school full-time. The doctors were optimistic. The treatment was working exactly as they'd hoped. That I wrapped presents that year with a lightness I hadn't felt in months. The bills were paid. David was getting better. We'd weathered the crisis. 6 months later, when David needed another procedure for a minor complication, I was already back in the same loan office, signing papers for mortgage number 3. That the loan officer's office felt familiar now, like a place I visited regularly instead of somewhere I'd stumbled into during a crisis. His name was Mr. Rodriguez, and he remembered me from 6 months earlier. He asked about David's health while pulling out the same stack of forms. Just a precautionary procedure, I explained, though the word precautionary felt hollow when it came with a $15,000 price tag. David's port had gotten infected, requiring surgical replacement and another week in the hospital. You still have equity available, Mr. Rodriguez said, running numbers on his computer. Not as much as before, but enough to cover this. The third mortgage gave me access to $18,000. Added to the previous 2 loans, I now owed more against my house than I'd paid for it 15 years ago. But David was healthy. The treatment had worked. His last blood test showed normal counts for the first time in 18 months. That I signed the papers with hands that had learned the routine. My signature looked smaller than it used to, more careful. Your son is lucky to have a mother who fights for him, Mr. Rodriguez said as he gathered the documents. That I drove home through neighborhoods where other mothers were picking up kids from soccer practice, arguing about homework, dealing with normal problems. Our crisis was over, but the weight of what I'd traded for David's life was just beginning to settle. That night, I calculated our new monthly payment. The original mortgage plus 2 additional loans meant I now owed the bank $2,847 every month. My take-home pay from both jobs was around $200. I stared at the numbers, writing them again to make sure I hadn't made a mistake. I hadn't. The house felt different somehow, like it was watching me. The floorboards that used to creak with familiarity now sounded like warnings. The kitchen window that had shown me Mrs. Patterson's garden for 15 years now framed a view of something that might not be mine much longer. David came home from school that afternoon with a drawing he'd made in art class, our family standing in front of our house, all of us smiling under a bright yellow sun. He'd written "Home Sweet Home" across the top in crayon letters. That I hung it on the refrigerator next to Sophia's college acceptance letter, both of them representing futures that suddenly felt less certain than they had that morning. The envelope from First National Bank arrived on a Tuesday in March, the same day Sophia brought home her acceptance letter to community college. She was bouncing around the kitchen, waving the letter like a flag, talking about fall classes and prerequisites for her nursing program. I held the bank envelope without opening it, watching my daughter plan her future while mine unraveled in my hands. "Mom, are you listening?" Sophia asked. "They have a payment plan for tuition. I can take night classes and keep working." "That's wonderful, baby," I said, slipping the envelope into my purse. "I'm so proud of you." But later, sitting in my car outside the grocery store, I finally tore it open. The words swam on the page at first, legal language that took me 3 readings to understand. Foreclosure proceedings. 90 days notice. Default on loan obligations. 90 days to find somewhere else to live. I called the bank from the parking lot, my hands shaking as I dialed Mr. Rodriguez's extension. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe there was something I could do. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thornton," he said, his voice gentler than it had been during our previous meetings. "The loans have been in default for 4 months. We've sent several notices." I remembered the notices, official-looking envelopes I'd set aside while dealing with David's final treatments. I'd planned to call, to work something out, but then there was always another appointment, another crisis, another reason to delay. "What are my options?" I asked. At this point, very limited. "You could try to bring the loans current, but that would require payment of all missed amounts plus penalties. Nearly $12,000. $12,000 might as well have been $12 million that evening. I gathered my kids around the dining room table, the one I'd refinished when Miguel was small, where we'd celebrated birthdays and worked through homework problems and shared thousands of meals. Sophia was still glowing from her acceptance letter. Miguel was filling out job applications. David was drawing pictures of superheroes. "We need to talk about some changes coming up," I began. Miguel looked up from his application. He was 18 now, old enough to read the worry in my voice. "Are you okay, Mom?" Sophia asked. "Is David okay?" "David's fine. Completely healthy. I took a breath. But we're going to have to move. The word move seemed to echo in the kitchen. David's crayon stopped moving across the paper. Move where? Miguel asked. I'm not sure yet, but we have some time to figure it out. 90 days, minus the week I'd already lost to denial. Is it because of my medical bills? David asked, his voice small. No, baby. It's because sometimes grown-up money stuff gets complicated. But David was 10, not stupid. He'd heard the phone calls, seen the stack of bills, noticed the way conversations stopped when he walked into rooms. He knew his illness had cost us more than money. I'm sorry, Mom. He whispered that I knelt beside his chair and pulled him close. Don't you ever apologize for getting sick. Don't you ever think this is your fault. But even as I said it, I wondered if he'd carry this guilt with him forever. The knowledge that saving his life had cost us our home. Finding an apartment with 3 kids and ruined credit was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Every application required a credit check, first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. The math was impossible before I even factored in landlords who took one look at my credit score and found excuses not to call back. Previous rental history. One landlord asked over the phone. I've owned my home for 15 years. Any previous landlord references? No, I've been a homeowner. The conversation usually ended there. My sister Elena lived 20 minutes away in a 1-bedroom apartment barely large enough for her and her cat. When I called to explain our situation, she didn't hesitate. Of course you can stay here, she said, as long as you need. But 5 people and a cat in 400 square feet was stretching the definition of hospitality beyond recognition. Miguel slept on the couch. David and Sophia shared an air mattress in the living room, and I took the floor beside Elena's bed. Our belongings filled garbage bags stacked in corners like accusations of poor planning. Elena worked the early shift at a nursing home, leaving the house at 5 a.m. and returning exhausted at 3 p.m. I tried to keep the kids quiet during her sleep hours. Impossible in a space where every footstep echoed. Every whispered conversation carried through thin walls. It's just temporary, I kept telling them, the words becoming a mantra that lost meaning through repetition. David struggled most with the transition. He'd lost his room, his routine, his sense of permanence. He started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was 5. Sophia cleaned up after him without complaint, washing sheets in Elena's tiny washer that could barely handle a normal load. Miguel found a second job bussing tables at a restaurant downtown. He was saving every dollar, though he wouldn't say for what. Sophia kept babysitting, turning over her earnings to help with groceries and gas money. My children had become adults while I wasn't paying attention. 6 weeks into our stay, Elena's landlord knocked on the door while I was helping David with homework at her kitchen table. Mrs. Ramirez, we need to discuss the additional occupants in your unit, he said, glancing over Elena's shoulder at our makeshift living arrangement. Elena's lease allowed 1 additional person for short-term stays. We were 4 additional people with no end date in sight. Their family, Elena explained. They just need a little time to get back on their feet. I understand, but my insurance doesn't cover this many occupants. If something happened, if someone got hurt, he was kind but firm. We had 2 weeks to find another arrangement. That night, after the kids were asleep, Elena and I sat at her kitchen table drinking coffee and avoiding each other's eyes. I'm sorry, she said. I wish I could. Don't apologize. You've done more than enough. But we both knew what came next. Elena had to choose between her own housing security and her sister's family. She'd worked 10 years to afford this apartment, to build the stable life that one phone call could destroy. The boys could go to Phoenix, she suggested quietly. Your ex-mother-in-law has that big house, and Miguel's almost graduated anyway. Phoenix, 800 miles away from the life we'd built, from the schools they knew, from me. And Sophia could finish the school year with Jessica's family. Elena continued. They offered before. I nodded, unable to speak. We were planning the dismantling of my family like it was a reasonable solution instead of an admission of complete failure. When Elena had to choose between her home and ours, I knew I'd make the same choice, but that didn't make it hurt any less when she asked us to leave. Packing 3 children's lives into suitcases and garbage bags was an exercise in choosing what mattered most. Miguel kept his guitar and a shoebox of concert tickets. Sophia saved her journals and the stuffed elephant she'd had since kindergarten. David wanted to bring everything, every toy, every book, every crayon drawing, as if the weight of possessions could anchor him to the family we used to be. You can only take what fits in one bag, I told him gently. He stared at his room's worth of belongings spread across Elena's living room floor. What about Mr. Bear? Mr. Bear was a ratty stuffed animal that had survived David's toddler years, his hospital stays, and countless washing machine cycles. I picked it up and tucked it into his bag. Mr. Bear definitely comes with you. The drive to the airport felt like driving to a funeral. Miguel sat in the front seat, trying to look mature and responsible while his leg bounced with nervous energy. David pressed his face against the window, watching familiar landmarks disappear behind us. Their grandmother, my ex-husband's mother, was waiting at the gate with a smile that didn't quite hide her concern. She'd raised 4 boys of her own and survived her youngest son's abandonment of his family. She knew how to take care of children, but these weren't visiting grandchildren anymore. These were refugees from their own lives. "You boys are going to love Phoenix," she said, hugging them both. "I've got your rooms already." Miguel was 18, legally an adult, but he still looked like a little boy when he hugged me goodbye. "Take care of yourself, Mom. Please." David clung to me until the boarding announcement forced us apart. "When are you coming to visit?" "Soon, baby. Very soon." Another lie added to the collection I'd been building since our crisis began. Sophia was easier in some ways, harder in others. Jessica's family had been friends since middle school, and Sophia was practically a daughter to them already. But watching her pack up her life felt like watching her choose a new family over the one that had failed her. "I'll call every day," she promised as I dropped her off at Jessica's house. "Focus on school. Graduate. Don't worry about me, Mom." She grabbed my hand through the car window. "I love you. I love you too, baby girl." Standing in Elena's driveway with my single duffel bag, watching Elena's door close behind me, I realized I had no idea where I was supposed to go next. For 18 years, my identity had been wrapped up in taking care of other people. I was Miguel's mom, Sophia's mom, David's mom. Without them, I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be. The homeless shelter on Oak Street had a waiting list, but emergencies could sometimes be accommodated. I sat in the intake office filling out forms that asked for information I no longer had. Permanent address, none. Emergency contact, my children scattered across the state. Next of kin, the sister whose apartment I'd just been asked to leave. Bed assignment depends on availability, the intake worker explained. Doors lock at 9 p.m. sharp. Lights out at 10. No exceptions. The dormitory held 40 women in 20 bunk beds. My assigned spot was upper bunk, bed number 37. The woman below me introduced herself as Margaret, a former teacher whose pension had been cut and medications had become unaffordable after 30 years in the classroom. "First time?" she asked as I made up my bed with the provided sheets. "Yes. It gets easier. Not better, but easier." That night, lying on a narrow mattress in a room full of strangers, I listened to the sounds of other people's breathing, other people's dreams, other people's whispered phone calls to family members who might or might not answer. Somewhere in Phoenix, my boys were falling asleep in rooms that weren't theirs. Somewhere across town, Sophia was doing homework at someone else's kitchen table. I'd saved David's life and destroyed everything else. Morning came with loudspeakers and fluorescent lights. And suddenly I had 8 hours to kill before I could return to the only bed I had left. The geography of homelessness is a map drawn in desperation. By my second week on the streets during the day, I'd memorized which churches served lunch on which days. Monday was St. Mary's with their thick soup and day-old bread. Tuesday was the Methodist church with sandwiches and fruit. Wednesday was the community center with hot meals that tasted like hope. The public library became my office, my living room, my sanctuary. I claimed a corner table near the computers and spent hours applying for jobs I'd never get. Apartments I couldn't afford, assistance programs with waiting lists longer than David's treatment schedule had been. The librarians were kind but watchful, monitoring how long each person stayed, gently enforcing policies about sleeping and bathing. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you'll need to wake up," one of them said after I'd dozed off over a job application. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in the harsh glow of institutional spaces. I wasn't sleeping, just resting my eyes. She smiled with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. "I understand, but we can't allow patrons to sleep in the library." Bus routes became my mobile shelter. The number 47 ran a 40-minute loop from downtown to the mall and back. For $2, I could ride for hours, watching the city pass by through tinted windows, staying warm and dry and moving. The drivers changed shifts at noon and 6 p.m. Some of them recognized the regulars, the ones who rode all day with nowhere else to go. "You getting off anywhere today, Han?" one driver asked as we completed our third loop. "Next stop." I lied. Fishing for another $2 I couldn't spare. The hardest part wasn't the sleeping or the hunger or the constant search for clean bathrooms. The hardest part was becoming invisible, watching people's eyes slide past me like I was part of the landscape, indistinguishable from the benches and trash cans and bus stop signs. I learned to recognize other homeless people by the careful way we moved through spaces we weren't supposed to occupy. The precise timing required to use facilities without overstaying welcomed at the shelter. Margaret and I developed the tentative friendship of people who'd lost everything except the need for human connection. She'd been homeless for 6 months, long enough to know which social workers actually cared and which ones were just collecting paychecks. "The key is staying busy during the day," she told me as we walked to the Methodist church for Tuesday lunch. "Having a routine makes you feel human." But feeling human required more energy than I had most days. It required believing that this was temporary, that I was still the woman who'd raised 3 children and owned a house and made a life that mattered. Some days I could summon that belief. Other days I just tried to survive until bedtime. My phone service got cut off in June. The final bill had been forwarded to the shelter, but $37 might as well have been $37,000. Without a phone, I became even more disconnected from the world, from my children, from any possibility of employment or housing. Miguel called the library looking for me on a Thursday afternoon when the heat had driven everyone inside. The librarian, a young woman with purple streaks in her hair and kind eyes, actually came to find me in the stacks where I was pretending to research job opportunities. "Your son is worried sick," she said. "He's been calling every library in the city." I used the payphone outside the gas station across the street, feeding quarters into the slot while trucks rumbled past on the highway. Miguel's voice cracked when he answered. "Mom? Oh God, Mom, where have you been?" "I'm okay, baby. I'm fine." "No, you're not. We know about the shelter. Sophia's been calling around. We've been going crazy." I pressed my forehead against the hot metal of the phone booth. "I didn't want you to worry. We're your kids. Worrying is our job." But I was supposed to be their mother, not their burden. I was supposed to protect them, not force them to track me down like a missing person. The heat that summer was merciless. And sleeping rough meant learning to time everything around the sun and the police patrol schedules. Summer in a homeless shelter felt like being trapped in a slow-cooking oven. The building's air conditioning was perpetually broken, and 40 women sleeping in one room created a humidity that made breathing feel like work. By July, I'd learned to time my entire day around finding air-conditioned spaces, the library until closing, the mall until security noticed, the hospital waiting room if I looked sick enough. The heat drove me outside earlier and kept me out later. I discovered the rhythm of police patrols. Officer Martinez at 5 a.m., Officer Chin at noon, Officer Williams in the evening. They weren't cruel, just tired, moving homeless people along with the weary patience of janitors cleaning up the same mess every day. "Can't stay here, lady," Officer Chin said as I dozed under the overpass that provided the only shade for 6 blocks. "Business owners complain." I gathered my belongings and shuffled toward the next patch of tolerance, joining the invisible parade of people who had nowhere to be but couldn't stay anywhere. The McDonald's on 4th Street became my salvation. Their bathroom didn't require a key, the air conditioning worked, and if I bought a small coffee, I could sit for an hour without harassment. I rationed those dollars like medicine, 1 coffee, 1 hour of relief, then back to the heat that pressed down like a punishment for existing. Food poisoning hit me on a Tuesday in August. The gas station sandwich had tasted off, but hunger makes you ignore warning signs your body sends. By evening, I was vomiting in the parking lot behind the library, too weak to make it back to the shelter before curfew. The emergency room was bright and cold and full of people with insurance and addresses. I gave them my name and explained my symptoms while trying not to throw up on their intake forms. The nurse looked at me with the particular combination of pity and exhaustion reserved for frequent flyers. Any permanent address? No. Emergency contact. I thought about Miguel in Phoenix, Sophia across town, David learning to live without his mother. No. They gave me 4 fluids and anti-nausea medication and a paper cup of ice chips that tasted like heaven. But hospitals aren't hotels, and once my vitals stabilized, they needed the bed for someone with better insurance that I spent the next 2 days cycling between park benches and the emergency room. Too sick to keep water down, but too proud to call my children. The security guard at Riverside Park knew me by name now, gently waking me when the sprinklers were scheduled to turn on, warning me when park services was coming through. There's a day cooling center at the community college, he suggested, just until you feel better. The cooling center was a gymnasium lined with cots and industrial fans that moved hot air around like a convection oven. Volunteers distributed water bottles and peanut butter sandwiches, while a social worker made announcements about housing assistance programs with 2-year waiting lists. Margaret found me there on day 3, sweating through my clothes despite the fans. Jesus, Hannah, you look terrible. Feel worse. She helped me back to the shelter that evening, walking slowly while I stopped every few blocks to catch my breath. The intake worker checked my temperature and asked if I needed medical attention. I'll be fine, I said, though fine felt like a foreign concept that night. Listening to Margaret's steady breathing from the bunk below, I understood how people disappeared entirely, how they stopped fighting, stopped trying, stopped believing they deserved anything better than whatever space they could find. I wasn't dying from food poisoning. I was dying by degrees, losing pieces of myself every day until there might not be enough left to save. The woman in the mirror at the McDonald's bathroom looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, sunburned, 20 pounds lighter than the mother who used to pack school lunches and read bedtime stories. I splashed water on my face and tried to remember who I used to be. I was coming out of that bathroom, trying to look like a customer instead of someone using their facilities to pretend I still existed. When I saw Sophia walking toward me like she'd been searching for me her whole life, Sophia moved like someone with purpose, scanning faces in the crowd outside McDonald's with the systematic attention of a detective. When our eyes met through the glass door, her expression didn't change to shock or pity. She just walked faster. "Mom," she said as I stepped onto the sidewalk, my hands still damp from washing my face in their bathroom. "I've been looking everywhere for you." I wanted to hug her, to cry, to explain that I was fine and just using their restroom like any normal person. Instead, I stood there feeling exposed under the afternoon sun, aware of how I must look after weeks of rationing shower access and sleeping in clothes that never got properly clean. "How did you find me?" "I've been calling shelters, hospitals, checking arrest records." Jessica's mom helped. Sophia stepped closer, and I could smell her shampoo, clean and familiar. "Miguel gave me a list of places you might go. Libraries, churches, bus stops. The systematic search of someone looking for a missing person. I'd become someone people had to track down instead of someone they could simply call." "I'm okay," I said automatically. "No, you're not." Her voice was gentle but firm. "And that's okay too." A woman walked past us into McDonald's, probably wondering why a teenage girl was having an intense conversation with someone who looked like she lived on the streets. Because I did live on the streets, I realized. That's exactly what I was now. "Mom, you're coming home with me." "Sophia, honey, you don't have space. I have space. We'll make space." She said it with the authority of someone who'd already decided, who'd spent weeks planning this moment. Jessica's parents said I could stay as long as I need to finish school, but I found an apartment. An apartment. Studio. 400 square feet. It's tiny, but it's mine. Well, ours now. I started to protest. About money, about her education, about the burden I'd become, but Sophia held up her hand. "I have 2 roommates. We pull everything. Rent, utilities, groceries. It works." She paused. "I got a promotion at the restaurant. Night manager. It pays enough." My 17-year-old daughter had become the adult in our relationship while I was learning the geography of survival. She'd figured out housing and income and how to save her mother while I was measuring my life in bus routes and meal schedules. "I can't let you do this. You can't stop me. I already signed the lease." We walked to her car, a 10-year-old Honda that Jessica's family had helped her buy, while I tried to process this reversal of everything I thought I knew about taking care of family. Sophia opened the passenger door for me like I was elderly or fragile. And maybe I was both. The apartment was in a complex that had seen better decades, with thin walls and carpet that had absorbed years of other people's lives. But it had a bathroom with a lock and a kitchen window that let in afternoon light, and when Sophia opened the door, it smelled like home instead of institution. "Your bed's over there," she said, pointing to an air mattress in the corner. "It's not much, but it's perfect." And it was. Not because of the space or the privacy or the working air conditioning, though all of those things felt like miracles. It was perfect because my daughter had made it for me, because she'd refused to let me disappear, because she'd grown into the kind of woman who saved people instead of abandoning them. That night, lying on the air mattress while Sophia did homework at the small table that served as desk and dining room, I listened to the sounds of normal life through thin walls. A family next door putting children to bed with gentle routines I remembered from another lifetime. A television playing a show I used to watch when I had a couch and the luxury of choosing what to do with my evenings. That Sophia's home turned out to be a studio apartment shared with two roommates. But after months on the streets, 400 square feet felt like a mansion. That Sophia's roommates were named Jessica and Marie, both 19 and working their way through community college with the grim determination of people who understood that education was their only way up. Jessica worked mornings at a coffee shop, Marie did evening shifts at a call center, and Sophia managed the intricate schedule that kept all three of them fed and housed. "Rent is $1,200 total," Sophia explained as we sat around the folding table that served multiple purposes in their tiny space. "We split it 3 ways, $400 each. Utilities run about $60 per person. Groceries we pool, usually, around $40 a week each." I listened to my daughter break down the mathematics of survival with the precision of someone who'd learned that a miscalculated budget meant sleeping in a car. She was 17 years old, managing adult responsibilities while her mother had been learning which park benches stayed dry in the rain. "I can't afford $400, I said quietly. "You don't need to. Not yet." Sophia's voice carried the patience she'd inherited from me, back when I was the one solving problems instead of creating them. "Jessica's cousin might be moving out next month. When that happens, we'll split it 2 ways. $600 each." $600 was still more than I could manage without a job, an address, or any prospect of either. But Sophia had already thought of that too. "There's a diner hiring," she said. "Night shift, for nights a week. The manager is friends with my boss. She said she'd give you a chance if I vouched for you." Vouch for me. My teenage daughter using her reputation to secure her mother's employment. The role reversal felt complete and devastating. "Sophia, honey, I can't let you, Mom." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "You spent 18 years taking care of us. Let me take care of you for a while." The shower in their apartment was barely large enough to turn around in, but it had hot water and privacy and soap that smelled like vanilla instead of industrial disinfectant. I stood under the spray for 20 minutes, washing months of shelters and streets from my skin, watching the water swirl down the drain, carrying pieces of the person I'd become. In the mirror afterward, I looked more like myself. Thinner, older, marked by experiences that would never fully fade, but recognizably the woman who'd once tucked children into bed and made grocery lists and believed the future was something you could plan. Sophia had laid out clean clothes on my air mattress, jeans and a sweater that fit well enough to pass for my own. She'd thought of everything, planned for my rescue with the thoroughness I'd once applied to managing our household. That evening, we called Miguel and David together, using Sophia's phone to connect our scattered family across the miles. Miguel cried when he heard my voice, and David asked when I was coming to visit. "Soon," I promised, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel like a lie. "Are you safe now?" David asked. That I looked around the tiny apartment, the air mattress in the corner, the folding table covered with homework and bills, my daughter organizing her life around saving mine. "Yes, baby, I'm safe." Through the thin walls, I could hear the family next door putting their children to bed, and their gentle routine brought back memories I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The memories came at unexpected moments. Standing at Sophia's kitchen window, watching morning light slant across the courtyard, I'd suddenly remember afternoon sun falling across my dining room table 15 years ago, the one I'd refinished myself, where Miguel had learned to tie his shoes and Sophia had practiced spelling words and David had drawn pictures of our family standing in front of our house. The house on Maple Street belonged to strangers now. I'd driven past it once, shortly after Sophia found me, and saw new curtains in the kitchen window, a different car in the driveway, children's bikes scattered across the lawn where my kids had once played. The crooked front steps had been fixed. Mrs. Patterson still tended her garden next door, but she looked away when she saw me sitting in Sophia's car at the curb. "It's just a house," Sophia said when I told her about the drive-by. But it wasn't just a house. It was 15 years of mortgage payments, of Christmas mornings and homework supervision, and the particular way David's laugh echoed off the kitchen walls. It was the place where I'd become a mother, where I'd learned to fix things that broke, where I believed I was building something permanent. The job at the diner came through exactly as Sophia had promised. Midnight to 6 a.m., 4 nights a week, serving coffee and pie to truckers and insomniacs, and people whose stories I didn't ask about. The manager, Carol, was a woman in her 50s who'd hired enough desperate people to recognize the signs. "Sophia says you're reliable," she said during my interview in the back office that smelled like coffee grounds and industrial cleaning supplies. "I am good, because reliable is all I care about. Show up on time. Don't steal anything. Treat customers like human beings. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then you start Thursday." The uniform was black pants and a white shirt with Mel's Diner embroidered over the pocket. I hadn't worn a name tag in months, hadn't been anyone's employee or anyone's anything except a problem to be managed. Pinning it to my shirt felt like reclaiming a piece of identity I'd thought was gone forever. The work was familiar, taking orders, pouring coffee, wiping down tables. But doing it at 3 a.m. created a different universe than the breakfast crowds I'd served before. Night shift customers were gentler somehow, more aware of their shared displacement from normal schedules. The regulars learned my name and left better tips than they could afford. "First week is always rough," said Janet, the other night waitress, as we refilled salt shakers during a slow hour. "Your body has to adjust to the schedule." But my body had been adjusting to impossible schedules for months. This felt easy compared to timing my day around library hours and shelter curfews and the geographical requirements of staying invisible. That my first paycheck was $347 after taxes. Not enough to cover half of anything, but enough to contribute something to Sophia's careful budget. I handed her the entire amount, and she gave me back $50. "For personal expenses," she said. Personal expenses. I'd forgotten that such things existed. Money for shampoo you chose yourself, for a cup of coffee that wasn't charity, for the small luxuries that separated living from merely surviving. The diner. Time moved differently. The hours between midnight and dawn felt suspended from the regular world, populated by people who existed in the margins of normal life. I served coffee to security guards ending their shifts, to nurses heading home from the hospital, to insomniacs who'd given up pretending they could sleep. One regular, a man named Frank, who drove long-haul trucks, always ordered the same thing: black coffee and apple pie, extra ice cream. "You remind me of my daughter," he said one Thursday morning as I refilled his cup. "She's about your age. Lives in Seattle now. Do you see her often?" "Not often enough." He stirred sugar into his coffee with the careful attention of someone performing a ritual. "Life gets complicated, you know. Things happen that you don't plan for." I knew exactly what he meant. Miguel called that weekend with news about his job interview, and for the first time in months, I had a real address where he could reach me. Miguel's voice on the phone carried the careful optimism of someone who'd learned not to expect too much good news at once. He'd interviewed for a position at a warehouse in Phoenix, steady work with benefits and the possibility of overtime. At 19, he was speaking the language of adults who planned beyond their next paycheck. The supervisor said I reminded him of his son. Miguel told me as I sat on Sophia's apartment floor. The phone pressed to my ear. "I think that's good, right?" "That's very good, baby. If I get it, I can start sending you money. Help with rent, groceries, whatever you need." I closed my eyes against the familiar weight of role reversal. My children were supposed to be worried about college applications and weekend plans, not supporting their mother's basic survival. "You keep your money, Miguel. Focus on building your own life." Mom, we're family. We take care of each other. Family. The word had taken on new meaning since we'd been scattered across state lines, connected now by phone calls, and shared worry instead of shared meals and bedtime routines. We were still family, but we looked different than we had when we all lived under the same roof. David's voice was smaller when he took the phone, still carrying the uncertainty of a child whose world had been rearranged without his permission. When are you coming to visit? He asked, the same question he'd been asking for months. Soon, I said, knowing it was still more promise than plan. Grandma says maybe for Christmas. She says she'll buy your plane ticket. Christmas was 4 months away. A lifetime in the geography of homelessness, but manageable now that I had Sophia's address and a job that provided weekly paychecks. The future was beginning to look like something I could plan for instead of something that happened to me. That sounds perfect, baby. I can't wait to see you. After we hung up, Sophia and I sat at her folding table planning a budget that included plane tickets and Christmas presents. The kind of long-term thinking I'd forgotten was possible. She'd received her first semester grades, all A's while working full-time and managing a household that included her homeless mother. I'm proud of you, I told her as she showed me her transcript. I learned from the best, she said, and I wondered if that was true anymore. The diner had become my anchor to normal life. Regular customers knew my name and asked about my family. Carol had started scheduling me for an extra shift when other waitresses called in sick. The rhythm of work, order, deliver, clear, repeat, provided structure to days that had been formless for months. You're getting your sea legs back, Janet observed as we counted tips at the end of a busy Saturday night. She was right. I was remembering how to be reliable, how to show up and perform tasks and earn money that I could spend on things I chose. Small freedoms that felt revolutionary after months of institutional living. But the apartment was temporary housing, and we all knew it. Sophia's lease was month to month, and 3 people in 400 square feet was sustainable only in the short term. Jessica had started talking about transferring to a 4-year university. Marie was saving money to move closer to her boyfriend. The careful balance we'd created was fragile, dependent on circumstances beyond our control. We need to start looking for a place, Sophia said one evening as we shared a dinner of pasta and canned sauce. Something more permanent. Permanent. Another word that had lost meaning and was slowly gaining it back. I had a job now, a steady income, and the beginning of a rental history that wasn't completely catastrophic. Maybe permanent was something I could build again, even if it looked different than it had before. When Sophia brought home the apartment listing circled in red ink, I realized she'd been planning our next move without telling me. The apartment listing was for a 1-bedroom place 6 blocks away. $850 a month with utilities included. Sophia had circled it in red ink and written notes in the margins. Bus line. Laundromat nearby. Grocery store walking distance. She'd been apartment hunting the way she'd once searched for her missing mother, with systematic thoroughness and careful attention to detail. It's not much, she said, spreading the printout on our folding table between dinner plates and homework assignments. But it's bigger than this, and we wouldn't need roommates. I studied the grainy photos of a living room that could fit a couch, a kitchen with actual counter space, a bedroom with a real closet. After months of sleeping on floors and sharing space with strangers, it looked like luxury. Can we afford it? I asked. Sophia pulled out a notebook where she'd been tracking our combined income with the precision of an accountant. Your job pays about $1,400 a month. My promotion bumped me up to $1,800. That's $3,200 total. She'd done the math multiple times, I could tell. Rent, utilities, groceries, transportation, clothes, emergencies. The numbers worked, barely. If nothing went wrong and neither of us got sick and my ancient car continued running on prayers and oil changes. It's tight, she admitted, but doable. Doable. Not comfortable, not easy, but possible. The distance between possible and impossible had narrowed to the width of Sophia's careful calculations and our combined determination not to sleep on anyone else's floor. That we visited the apartment on a Sunday afternoon, meeting the landlord, a tired-looking man named Mr. Chun who managed 6 units in the complex and seemed more interested in reliable tenants than perfect credit scores. Employment verification, he said, reviewing our application. References: first month, last month, and security deposit. The financial requirements were standard, but they represented weeks of tips and careful budgeting. Sophia had been saving for this moment, setting aside money from her promotion while I learned to survive on diner wages. Your daughter's the primary applicant? Mr. Chen asked, glancing between us. Yes, Sophia said with the confidence of someone who'd been managing adult responsibilities for months. I can provide pay stubs, bank statements, whatever you need. I signed the application as co-applicant, my signature smaller and less certain than Sophia's bold handwriting. At 52, I was depending on my 17-year-old daughter's credit history and employment record to secure housing. The role reversal was complete, but it no longer felt shameful. It felt like family taking care of family. We'll let you know by Wednesday, Mr. Chen said as he walked us through the empty apartment one more time. The bedroom had a window that faced west, catching afternoon light the way my kitchen window on Maple Street used to do. I stood there imagining curtains, furniture, the gradual accumulation of belongings that turned empty space into home. What do you think? Sophia asked. I think it's perfect. That evening, we called Miguel and David to tell them about the apartment, describing rooms they'd never seen for a home they might never visit. But they were excited anyway, asking about which bedroom would be theirs when they came to stay, planning visits that felt more real now that we had an address to offer. I'm proud of you both, Miguel said, his voice carrying across the miles from Phoenix. You're building something good. Building something good. It wasn't the house on Maple Street with its 15 years of mortgage payments and memories embedded in every room. It wasn't the stable middle-class life I'd thought I was providing my children. But it was ours, earned through night shifts and careful budgeting and Sophia's unwavering belief that we deserved better than shelter beds and borrowed space. The approval call came on Tuesday evening while I was at work, pouring coffee for truckers and collecting tips in the pocket of my uniform. Sophia called the diner to tell me, her voice bright with victory. We got it. Mom, we got the apartment. I hung up the phone and stood in the back office of Mel's Diner, surrounded by delivery invoices and employee schedules, and cried with relief. Not the desperate tears I'd shed in homeless shelters or the angry tears of losing everything I'd built. These were different tears, the kind that came from moving forward instead of just surviving to AS. I filled out the rental application with Sophia's name as primary tenant. I understood that home had become something different than I'd ever imagined. Moving day arrived with the October wind that carried promises of winter and change. Our belongings fit into Sophia's Honda and 2 trips from Jessica's apartment, a sharp contrast to the moving truck I'd needed when we left Maple Street. Everything we owned could be carried by hand, clothes in garbage bags. A few dishes Sophia had collected, my uniforms from the diner, books David had left behind. This is weird, Sophia said as we stood in our empty apartment, our voices echoing off bare walls. Good weird, but weird. Word was exactly right. I was 52 years old, starting over in a place where nothing carried memories of the life I'd lost. No dining room table where homework had been supervised. No kitchen window with a view of Mrs. Patterson's garden. No creaky floorboards that had announced midnight trips to check on sick children. But the absence of history also meant the absence of ghosts. This apartment would hold only what we put into it, only the life we built going forward. Our first furniture was an air mattress for the bedroom and 2 folding chairs from the grocery store. Sophia insisted I take the bedroom while she slept on the living room floor. Another reversal that felt both wrong and necessary. You work nights, she said when I protested. You need to sleep during the day. I'll be at school or work anyway. The practical logic was sound, but lying on the air mattress in the middle of a room meant for grown-ups. I felt like a child being cared for by someone wiser and more capable than I was. Work at the diner had become routine, even comfortable. Carol had promoted me to senior night waitress, which came with a small raise and the responsibility of training new employees. I'd learned to read the customers who needed conversation and the ones who wanted to be left alone with their coffee and their thoughts. You're good at this, Carol told me as we closed one Thursday morning. Natural hostess. Ever think about restaurant management? Management. The word implied a future beyond survival, beyond earning enough money to split rent and buy groceries. It suggested the possibility of building something again, even if it looked different than what I'd built before. But planning beyond next month still felt dangerous, like tempting fate to take away what little stability we'd achieved. I'd learned not to get too comfortable, not to assume that what worked today would work tomorrow. Sophia was thriving in her new independence. She'd enrolled in spring classes at the community college, mapping out a path toward her nursing degree with the same systematic planning she'd applied to finding our apartment. She worked her restaurant job with the efficiency of someone who understood that every dollar mattered. Every shift was an investment in something larger. "I've been thinking about David," she said one evening as we shared takeout Chinese food on our folding chairs. "About when he might be able to visit." Visit. The word carried weight we both understood. David was 10 years old, living 800 miles away with a grandmother who loved him but wasn't his mother. Every phone call ended with his question about when he could come home, and every time I promised soon, while not knowing what soon meant. "Christmas, maybe," I said, "if we can save for a plane ticket. I've been putting aside money. $20 a week since I started the new job." Sophia showed me an envelope tucked behind our few dishes. "Should be enough by December." $20 a week from a budget that already stretched to cover necessities. My daughter was saving for her brother's visit by eating generic cereal and walking to work instead of taking the bus. "Sophia, honey, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. We're family. We take care of each other." The same words Miguel had used, the same philosophy I tried to teach them when they were small, and I was the one doing the taking care of. They'd learned the lesson too well, applying it to circumstances I'd never imagined when I was packing their school lunches and reading bedtime stories. That night, lying on the air mattress in our bedroom, I listened to the sounds of normal life around us. Neighbors coming home from late shifts, televisions playing through thin walls, the distant hum of traffic from the main road. It wasn't the suburban quiet of Maple Street, but it was the sound of people living their lives in small spaces they'd chosen, making do with what they had. Through the thin walls, I could hear the family next door putting their children to bed, and their gentle routine brought back memories I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The phone calls with my boys had developed their own rhythm. Sunday evenings, after Sophia got home from work and before my shift at the diner, we'd dial Miguel's number in Phoenix and talk for an hour about ordinary things that felt extraordinary because we were sharing them across distance. Miguel had gotten the warehouse job. 40 hours a week with health insurance and a retirement plan he was too young to understand the value of. At 19, he spoke about benefits packages and overtime opportunities with the seriousness of someone who'd learned early that financial security was something you built carefully, one paycheck at a time. "They're promoting me to team leader," he told us during one of our calls. "More responsibility, but better pay. I'll be training new hires." Training new hires. My son, who used to need reminding to brush his teeth, was becoming someone other people would look to for guidance. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, but underneath it was something else, the weight of growing up too fast, of taking on adult responsibilities while his friends were still figuring out college majors. That David's voice was changing, dropping into deeper registers that reminded me he was growing up in a house I'd never seen, with routines I wasn't part of. He talked about school friends and Little League and the dog his grandmother had adopted, a life that sounded normal and stable and completely separate from the apartment Sophia and I were building. "When are you coming to visit?" he asked, the same question every week. "Christmas," I said, and this time it felt like a promise I could keep. "Sophia's saving money for your plane ticket." "Really? I can really come." The excitement in his voice was painful and wonderful at the same time. He shouldn't have had to be excited about visiting his mother. That should have been as natural as breathing, as automatic as coming home from school to the house where he belonged. "Really, baby? 2 weeks at Christmas. We'll make it special." After we hung up, Sophia and I sat at our folding table planning Christmas like it was a military operation. Budget for David's plane ticket, budget for presents, budget for groceries to feed 3 people instead of 2. The calculations were tight, requiring us to save every possible dollar between October and December. "We could get a small tree," Sophia suggested. "One of those tabletop ones." A tree. I hadn't thought about Christmas decorations since we'd lost the house, hadn't considered that we might create holiday traditions in this small apartment with its empty walls and borrowed furniture. But Sophia was right. We needed rituals, celebrations, reasons to believe that this life we were building could hold joy as well as survival. Work at the diner had taken on new meaning beyond just earning money. I'd become part of the night shift community, the overlooked economy of people who kept the world running while others slept. My regular customers knew about Sophia's college plans and asked about David's upcoming visit. Janet brought me clothes her daughter had outgrown. Carol let me take extra shifts when I needed overtime pay. "You've got your color back," Carol observed one morning as we counted the till. "When you first started here, you looked like you'd been through a war." Maybe I had been through a war. The war between David's medical needs and our financial reality, between keeping my family together and keeping them housed, between my pride and my children's welfare. I'd lost most of the battles, but somehow we were all still standing. The apartment was slowly accumulating the small things that made a space feel like home. Sophia had bought curtains for the bedroom window, cheap fabric that let in light while providing privacy. I'd found a used coffee table at a thrift store, something to hold our takeout containers and homework assignments. We'd invested in real plates instead of paper ones, a small luxury that made our meals feel more substantial. Miguel sent pictures from Phoenix, him in his work uniform, grinning beside a forklift. David in his Little League uniform, holding a trophy for participation. Both of them standing in front of their grandmother's house, arms around each other's shoulders. They looked healthy and happy and settled, which was what I'd wanted for them. But they also looked older, changed by experiences I hadn't shared. "They're doing good," Sophia said, studying the photos I'd pinned to our refrigerator. "Yeah, they are. You did that, Mom. You made sure they had somewhere safe to go." Safe. My boys were safe and fed and loved, even if it wasn't by me in the house we used to share. My daughter was in college and building a future despite everything that had gone wrong. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was success, even if it looked different than I'd planned. When Sophia brought home the apartment listing circled in red ink, I realized she'd been planning our next move without telling me. The apartment listing was for a 2-bedroom place 4 blocks away. A step up that Sophia had been researching with the same thorough attention she'd applied to finding our current home. This one had a separate bedroom for each of us, a real kitchen with full-size appliances, and a living room large enough for actual furniture. "The rent's $1,100, she said, spreading the printout between us on our coffee table. "But if I get the assistant manager position at work, we can afford it." Assistant manager. My daughter was 19 now, climbing career ladders while managing a household and planning for her mother's future. She spoke about promotion opportunities and salary negotiations with the confidence of someone who'd learned early that you couldn't wait for good things to happen. You had to make them happen. "When would we move?" I asked, studying the photos of rooms that looked spacious after months in 400 square feet. "Spring, maybe. After David's visit. After I finish this semester." She'd already thought through the timing, coordinated it with school schedules and work commitments and the careful budget that governed our decisions. Planning 6 months ahead still felt like an act of faith. I'd learned to think in terms of weeks, sometimes days, measuring stability by whether I could make rent and buy groceries and keep my job at the diner. But Sophia was thinking in semesters and years, building towards something bigger than just getting by. David's visit had become the focal point of our fall planning. Sophia had saved enough for his plane ticket, and we'd arranged 2 weeks off from our jobs to spend time with him. I'd requested vacation days from Carol, the first time I'd used that particular benefit of employment. "He's going to love having his own room while he's here," Sophia said, looking at the pictures of the 2-bedroom apartment, his own room. The phrase carried weight we both understood. David had shared space for so long. First with his brothers in our house, then with Miguel at his grandmother's, now visiting us in an apartment where privacy was a luxury we couldn't afford. The idea of giving him his own space, even temporarily, felt like a small restoration of the childhood that had been disrupted by my choices. The diner work had evolved into something approaching a career. Carol had started training me on inventory management and vendor relationships, the behind-the-scenes operations that kept the restaurant running. I'd learned to calculate food costs and track sales patterns, skills that felt transferable to other jobs, other possibilities. "Ever think about opening your own place?" Janet asked one slow Tuesday night as we refilled condiment bottles at my own place. The idea was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. I'd learned to manage a household budget and work schedules and the complex logistics of keeping people fed and housed. Maybe those skills could translate into running a business, into building something that belonged to me instead of just surviving in spaces other people controlled. but starting a business required capital and credit and the kind of financial foundation I was still trying to rebuild. It was a dream for someday, not something I could plan for now. Miguel called with news that he was saving money to visit us in the spring, possibly for Sophia's birthday in April. The idea of our family being in the same place at the same time felt almost impossible to imagine, like a holiday that happened to other people. "I want to see where you live," he said. "See what you've built." What we built. It wasn't much by the standards I'd once held. A small apartment, jobs that paid just enough, furniture that was mostly secondhand and improvised. But it was ours, earned through night shifts and careful planning and Sophia's unwavering belief that we deserved better than the worst thing that had happened to us. The application for the two-bedroom apartment would require employment verification, references, and first month's rent plus security deposit. Sophia had already calculated what we'd need to save, how many extra shifts we'd each have to pick up, how long it would take to accumulate the money. "We can do this," she said with the confidence of someone who'd already done impossible things. I filled out the rental application with Sophia's name as primary tenant. I understood that home had become something different than I'd ever imagined. Not a place you owned, but a life you built with people who refused to let you disappear. The two-bedroom apartment became ours in March, 3 days before David's spring break visit. Sophia had gotten the assistant manager promotion and the raise that came with it, enough to tip our budget from barely possible to actually manageable. We moved our few belongings in a single afternoon, carried by hand from one apartment to another 4 blocks away. David's room was small, but his own, with a window that faced the courtyard and space for the twin bed we'd bought secondhand. Sophia had hung curtains and found a desk at a thrift store, creating a space that looked like it belonged to someone who lived there instead of just visiting. "This is really mine?" David asked when I picked him up at the airport, his grandmother behind him carrying a suitcase that seemed too large for a 10-year-old boy. "Really yours," I confirmed. "For 2 weeks, and whenever you want to visit after that." He was taller than I'd expected, his face showing the first hints of the teenager he'd become. But when he hugged me in the airport, he still smelled like the little boy who used to fall asleep during bedtime stories, who believed his mother could fix anything that broke. Those 2 weeks felt like borrowed time, a glimpse of the family life we'd lost and were slowly rebuilding in a different form. David and Sophia fell back into their sibling rhythm, her helping him with homework while he critiqued her cooking. I worked shorter shifts at the diner so I could be home for dinner, for bedtime routines, for the ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because we'd lost them for so long. "Can I come back this summer?" David asked on his last night, as I tucked him into the bed in his temporary room. "We'll figure it out," I said, smoothing his hair the way I used to when he was small. "We'll make it work." Making it work had become our family motto, the principle that governed everything from budget decisions to holiday plans. We made it work when Sophia needed textbooks we couldn't afford, and when my car broke down, and when David wanted to participate in activities that required money we didn't have. We made it work because the alternative was giving up, and none of us knew how to do that. Miguel visited in May, taking a long weekend from his warehouse job to see our new apartment and meet Sophia's friends from college. He looked older, more solid, wearing work clothes that fit him properly and speaking about his job with the confidence of someone who'd found his place in the world. "You did good, Mom," he said as we sat on our actual couch, another thrift store find, drinking coffee in our living room that could fit more than 2 people. "We all did good," I corrected. "We all took care of each other." That was the truth I'd learned through losing everything and building it back differently. Family wasn't just about living in the same house or sharing the same last name. It was about showing up for each other when everything went wrong, about making space in small apartments and tight budgets for the people who mattered most. Carol offered me the assistant manager position at the diner in June, a promotion that came with better pay and health insurance and the kind of stability I'd stopped believing was possible. I'd worked nights for over a year, proven myself reliable and capable and worth investing in. "You sure you're ready for day shifts?" she asked during my promotion interview. "Regular hours? Dealing with the breakfast crowd?" "Regular hours. A schedule that matched the rest of the world, that would let me have dinner with Sophia and call my boys during normal evening hours instead of stealing conversations between shifts." It felt like another step toward the ordinary life I'd learned not to take for granted. Sophia graduated from community college with honors in December, 2.5 years after we'd lost our house, and she'd been forced to grow up overnight. She'd been accepted to a 4-year nursing program starting in the spring, with enough scholarships to make it affordable and part-time work that would let her keep contributing to our household expenses. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said at her graduation ceremony. As I sat in the audience wearing a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, the first new clothes I'd purchased in years. "You did it all yourself," I told her afterward. "I just try not to get in the way." But we both knew that wasn't true. We'd done it together, saved each other in turns, built something that looked different than what we'd lost but felt strong enough to last. Now I sleep on a real bed in my own room, with my name on a lease and money in a savings account and plans that extend beyond next month's rent. It's not the life I planned when I used to stand at my kitchen window on Maple Street, watching Mrs. Patterson tend her garden while I organized my day around work and children and the comfortable routines of stability. But it's my life, built from the pieces that survived when everything else fell apart. Through the walls of our apartment, I can hear families with their own stories of loss and rebuilding, their own versions of making it work. Some nights I close my eyes and remember the weight of house keys in my pocket, the particular way afternoon light fell across my old dining room table. But when I open them, I see Sophia at our kitchen counter studying for her nursing boards, her phone showing a text from Miguel about his latest promotion, a photo from David's baseball game tucked to our refrigerator. Home isn't the place I lost. It's the life we built afterward, together, one careful choice at a time.